All right. Hey, thanks so much, Martin, for
Sure.
giving me the opportunity to come in and have this coaching conversation with you.
Happy to help.
My name is Bruce Burks,
Martin Herman.
and we are teachers here at Ross Senior Middle School here in the Eastern Province of Saudi Arabia. I teach 8th grade math, and Martin?
I teach grade 8 science, so we are colleagues, share the same students, and on the same team.
That's such a wonderful, great teacher already. So we're going to just kind of get into it and doing this coaching conversation. I understand that there's a lesson that you taught pretty recently, and you kind of just want to use that. So I think it'd be a great thing for us to start.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So we'll use the science lesson. One of the first questions I had was about the core standards that you have in the objectives. Okay. So what made you use those particular standards for the lesson and the types of objectives?
Yeah, so the standards that we're focusing on are fairly standard standards in the forces in motion units. And so the sort of the big idea is, or the big standard is to understand how scientists describe motion and represent motion and use motion in various forms. So at this stage in the unit, we're looking at acceleration. So kind of the most sophisticated version of motion. And so again, looking at a specific, within that bigger picture of, okay, motion can have a lot of different ways, but now we're honing in on acceleration in particular. And the idea there is to having the kids understand, like, what is acceleration? Like, conceptually, what does it mean? And then look at sort of, okay, how do you measure it? What is it? How do you recognize it in different forms, whether it's tables or graphs, and ultimately, like, feel it in their bodies.
Okay.
So that's kind of the combination of standard and the particular objectives for that lesson.
Okay, good, thank you. How did you ensure that the standards or that you had was aligned with the standards and the objectives? How did you ensure that you were able to have it connected and cohesive when teaching?
Yeah, the standards and objectives. So I think of that as the standard is sort of pretty clear on sort of being able to describe things about motion, particularly using its position, using its speed, things like that. And so when I thought about acceleration, I thought, okay, we've got to understand it from those different perspectives. What's going on with the position of objects, or in their case, from themselves when they're accelerating, and how does it compare to situations where there is no acceleration, or speed? That's a little more easy for them to relate to because they've all been in cars. So the idea there was to, okay, we can connect acceleration back to speed. So I think it's trying to link it back to some of the previous understanding that they've had from the lessons and from their sort of experience as humans to make sure that there's a connection between all of those.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because those standards and those objectives of students being able to identify the motion and speed and acceleration. So good, thank you for that. Now, when coming to science, so this is a story I'm not for sure I've told you before, but when I used to teach 6th grade science in Maryland, we had a back to school night.
Mm-hmm.
And after the back to school night, I went down back to my classroom, and there was this random guy that was just in my room, and he was looking at my objectives I had on the board. And I was like, hey, how's it going? Can I help you? And he didn't have any kid in my class, and he just looked at the standards, my objectives, and he said, hey, the goal of science is not to teach science, but to do science. Mm. And I looked at him like, what? But it blew my mind because I never thought about it that way. And I never saw the man again. No one knew who he was, right? So I've always had that story. So it's just a little thing that I always tell people about it. And that blew my mind, you know what I mean? And I kind of held on to that. You know, even when I taught grade 6, I was like, how do I do this and not just try to teach it? So yeah, that was interesting.
That's wild. That almost sounds like a movie or something.
Yeah, seriously.
Where somebody else was in the room and said, I didn't hear any conversation. What are you talking about?
Right. So the initial reflection of your lesson, right? We always reflect because it's just good teaching. So what instructional strategy did you use to deliver your lesson?
Yeah, so I think I would have to say multiple kinds of, multiple strategies. And they have to do with, something as simple as using groups of kids to support each other and to make sure that they're not missing some part of the instructions or some part of the setup as they're doing things, and supporting each other that way. Also, so that it's actually, it's a little more entertaining if they've got a team of people that they can go outside with and start, walking or running along a little path.
Okay.
So that, which leads to the other strategy, was to take it and say, we're not just gonna look at data that's been provided for us, but to actually go outside and sort of feel the data and see what it feels like. So there was a component of get outside, as well as I do, that always kind of lightens the lesson as well, or provides a little bit of nice just variety and relief from an indoor lesson. So there was that strategy. And then as well, sort of putting, rather than having them, just find some course that they could try to demonstrate the motions on, is sort of put physical objects in the ground, which were sort of a physical version of data that they would be seeing on a number in a table or in graphs. So there was a bit of a visual element to try and connect to it and say, you remember how the markers were farther and farther apart where you guys moved, and now you notice that in the table. So there was it was an attempt to try to have a visual to see what might have otherwise been abstract with just data and numbers in a data table. But then again, that too, that using the data in the graph, that's a strategy too, because there's so many different ways to sort of appreciate the concept, and they all reinforce each other. So it's the multiple sort of multiple means to approach the concept.
So that brought me to the next thing about the data that you were able to get from the lesson. How did you use that data to drive the instruction, or to help maybe it's grouping or whatnot? How did you use your data?
Okay, so in that case, the data that I used, some of it was on site, watching as the kids were out on these little courses and being able to say, something doesn't quite look right here, let me ask them what their take on it is, and let me say, are you sure that's what you were doing? So some of it was just on the fly, and kind of making sure that the task was going according to, that it was developing in a way that would contribute to their understanding rather than misunderstanding. So we've actually had a quiz just recently after that lesson. So I was able to also, tally some of their results. Sure. And this is actually the last part of we're kind of ending with acceleration, and so now we're going into unit test mode and just the overall picture. So what it's allowed me to do is to see, okay, I had one class, you see it's color coded, so one class was like, wow, they're mastering. Another couple classes, there's 10-15% of the kids that aren't mastering, and so those are the ones that I have to say, okay, who are we dealing with, and how do I make sure that they get the concept before we end the unit. And so part of that so when I look at that, I can see, okay, there's a series of pieces that they didn't quite get, and I can, the way I'm doing that is I'm saying, okay, I've got a study guide that I'm going to put in and make sure that they have another chance to do that in the study guide. Okay. To say, okay, I recognize that the quiz didn't cover that. You didn't hit that. You didn't master that standard or that objective, but we're going again, and now we can sort of be specific about that one.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. One of the things of looking at data and making sure that teachers are utilizing it for driving instruction, one thing that comes to mind is professional development, right? For all teachers to kind of not necessarily go in everybody's class or go to a place to sit down and hear someone speak, but being able to just kind of learn from each other. You have any thoughts on that as far as just building into the classroom, utilizing data for professional development to help you as a teacher and even to enhance your teaching strategies and whatnot?
Yeah, I think I think with this data, I could take it to one of our team meetings, which, you know, the four of us there would know the kids, and I could say, have a look at the results of that, you know, short assessment, and start to, well, what do you notice about it? And then just ask me questions about it and say, you know, you guys know the kids, you know, you'd recognize the name of the kids that didn't match the objectives, and it would be, you know, kind of a little counseling session for me to make me reflect and think about those kids, and it would be very targeted because you know the kids, and you'd have your perspective on them as well. So it would give me some perspective that I might not have that you guys do have to say. And again, to me, that's professional development because we're learning from each other, and this is truly specific. It's not a theory that about some type of assessment, whereas we're all on the ground together with the same kids. So that, I think that would be helpful to me, is to say, okay, here's the kids, here's the data, grill me. And then share any strategies that you guys had, or ask me if I thought about doing this and successes you've had that I might benefit from.
You know, you were talking about earlier about just seeing the data, and you identified some of the trends that you saw as well. There's one thing that you might have seen that you might celebrate, and one thing in your lesson that you might say, I might need to revisit that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's easy to celebrate things that might not even be in, you know, that I'm not even sure I could take credit for. But I do always celebrate when I see a full class master something. And so, or a full class, sorry, a section. You know, if we got 20 kids out of 60 in grade 8, and these 20 mastered it, I say, wow, well done. That's a celebration. And then what was the opposite of that?
Just something you might see that we could have done better.
Oh yeah, could have done better. Well, sure. There's always kind of the trends. And if we had to predict before the lesson and before the assessment who was going to struggle, and then we see, you know, despite our best efforts, they still struggled. And those are the parts that, you know, we have our high functioning autistic student, and she continues to baffle me with her learning and her understanding. And so that's the one where I need more work on.
No, I understand that. Thanks for that. So based on today's conversation, is there a next step that you could see yourself doing? And if so, would you mind me following up with you regarding that?
Yeah, so the comment I made about the learning, about the study guide, and about making sure that whatever target wasn't hit by the few students that didn't master the first time around, it would be to be sure to give that sort of attention, time, and value through the review process and the study guide. And then, the one that I know I sorely need some kind of almost intervention with, for me, is this is our autistic student, and just to try to
figure that out.
Try to see what's the way to help her understand, and that's
Well, thank you so much. I want to cut it off here a little time. I think I might have gone past it, but it's just good conversation, and I appreciate you just talking with me about it and just being open. I think that concludes it. So
pleasure.
thanks so much for it.
All right. Appreciate it.
Thank you.